Glenn Gould of Toronto has been likened to a supernova among the musical stars of the firmament. At the piano, his treatments of the works of Bach especially have attracted the praises of music critics from Victoria to Moscow. His first Columbia recording, the Goldberg Variations by Bach, which we are hearing now, became a bestseller, something unheard of in the field of classical music.
Perhaps the most telling review of his playing came after his American debut from the typewriter of Paul Hume of the Washington Post. He said, and I quote, "January 2nd is early for predictions, but it is unlikely that the year 1955 will bring us a finer piano recital than that played yesterday afternoon in the Phillips Gallery. We shall be lucky if it brings us others of equal beauty and significance."
Here then, at an exclusive assignment interview with Hugh Thompson, the distinguished music critic of the Toronto Daily Star, is Glenn Gould.
You have always loved Bach's music. To you, he's no dry-as-dust classic.
No composer presents quite so many problems, I think, as Bach does. And consequently, there's no composer that gives you quite as much scope, either, for exercising your own judgment.
I've read leading critics in England and in America suggesting that your Bach is extremely beautiful and beautifully articulated, but perhaps a little too exuberant and a little fast at times. Do you concur in this?
At times I concur.
You're very fair. Now, let me ask a question which I'm frequently asked as a music critic, and that is to this effect. Chopin, by common consent, I think, was the pianist-composer, and he is said to have discovered the heart and soul of the piano in his writing and exploits the piano's full facilities and potentialities so perfectly. Why, then, may I ask, as Canada's leading pianist, do you consistently ignore Chopin's music?
You've noticed, have you?
I've noticed for years.
Well, that's a long story. You know, I used to play Chopin a great deal. I really did. I had many
I didn't know that. This was a useful indiscretion, undoubtedly.
A very useful indiscretion. When I was about 14 years old, my star pieces were, without exception, Chopin, Liszt, or Schumann. At the end of the age of adolescence, if I've come to it, some great change occurred, and I simply could not any longer, not to say not enjoy Chopin, but I simply could not play it with any great conviction. And I mean, it wasn't a question of disliking Chopin as a composer. Actually, it's a composer that lately, again, I've become very curious about. I mean, I really don't underestimate him for 1 minute. You know, one very amusing thing occurred last year. I was going to play, I did play, in fact, on a program called Chrysler Festival, television program. And since this is a program, to put it mildly, aimed at the biggest audience, I decided that it would be very great fun if I could make my reappearance as a Chopin player in this format, you know, because I couldn't really see getting up and playing some of the Art of the Fugue, you know. I mean, it just didn't seem somehow right. And so I spoke to the producer about it, and he said, well, I think it's a great idea. And so I worked out a routine. I was going to get up and I was going to say, ladies and gentlemen, there have been nasty rumors going around that because I do not play Chopin, I cannot play Chopin. And tonight, once and for all, I intend to prove that I cannot play Chopin. And then I was going to play, in the schmaltziest fashion I could devise, some old warhorse. In fact, the one I had picked out and really practiced, I spent several nights burning the midnight oil working on it, was the waltz in A minor, you know.
Yes.
Well, I listened very carefully to the ancient Horowitz recording and copied all the rubatos and all the high points and all the low points, you see. And I thought, if I get panned for this, at least I can then play my recording side by side with Horowitz, you see. So anyway, I worked very hard, and the day of the show came. It was a public show. It was in one of the theaters here. Went down in the morning to the rehearsal, and being a sponsored show and not sustaining, there was, of course, the sponsor's agent, executive guy standing there making suggestions, you know, like which women should wear shorter dresses and things of that kind. Very important suggestions for the show. And so it came turn for my act, and I came out and I delivered this wonderful speech, and I thought I had them laying in the aisles, you see. And I went through, I played the piece, and afterward I was immediately called over to the producer's desk, and he said that, unfortunately, the agent objected very much. He didn't think that the sponsor would go for this at all. First of all, it was a slow piece. And secondly, they wanted something something a little bit more associated with me, something like the Art of the Fugue. That's what I play.
Well, I guess Chopin is too commercial for television.
Well, just to see what Glenn Gould can do with Bach, here is his treatment of the prelude to the Partita number 5 in G major.
A good deal of publicity, perhaps too much, has been aimed at the eccentricities of Glenn Gould. Hugh Thompson asks him about this.
Now, if I may, I'd like to touch on a topic that might be a little tender, I don't know, and that is the fact that many of my confreres, many music critics, play up your so-called eccentricities on the stage, on stage and off. Magazines have shown lurid displays of you going through some esoteric rites and so on. Now, when a critic plays up your mannerisms at a performance to the neglect possibly of your performance itself, does this irritate you? Does it infuriate you? Does it hurt your feelings?
Not in the slightest. However, I've devised a system for reading reviews very quickly now because I've decided which paragraphs represent musical criticism and which represent extraneous subjects, you know, and I just skip over these. But no, it doesn't hurt my feelings in the slightest.
Of course, you realize, Glenn, that as a newspaperman for the past 15 or 20 years, that it is your duty, even though you hold the exalted title of music critic, it's your duty to report local color.
Oh, absolutely. I think it has to be. And I don't see any reason that they should try to ignore it, you know. The only thing that I will mention, which was, to me, rather significant, when I was in Europe last year, it was for the first time, and so this may or may not be a pattern which will be followed, I don't know. Apart from Russia, where it's rather difficult to read the reviews, when I played in Germany and in Austria, there was only one review out of dozens that mentioned, and that in a sort of passing way, what you would call mannerisms.
Is that right?
That's true, yes.
And how long were you concertizing?
Well, I didn't.
And enjoying such impunity?
Well, only for 2 or 3 weeks, but the ratio was so small as to suggest that either an entirely different set of values prevail over there, or that because I was there for the first time, they were taking it easy on me, you know. And I don't know which it was, but in any case, it was a relief.
Well, possibly they regarded it as bad manners to become personal, even with a public performer.
That could be, yes. It wouldn't surprise me. But I don't know. It's a curious thing, because it really, in some ways, I mean, one could make parallels and say that this had something to do with the whole European idea of music making, that it was primarily a somewhat more private affair, you know, that whatever you do to accomplish your ends is your own business, so long as the ends are accomplished.
Now, before we came up to the CBC studio, You asked if it was going to be properly heated, and I see you're wearing your mitts. And now it doesn't bother me because we're all friends. But does this make you feel better? Does it?
Well, it does. Yes,
Because you're a very intelligent fellow, and
well, it seems to me that part of the joy of running your own life is to be able to control as many factors that contribute to your comfort as possible. You know?
Good for you.
And I just can't see why ignore these things just for the sake of the appearance.
Well, now let me ask one question, and you needn't answer it. As you know, I've been in New York almost 2 years now. Every time you've given a big concert or recital, and when you've made big recording engagements, and after the thing is over, we've got together a little bit, and I've had occasion once in a while to go up to your room, maybe have a meal there and talk, interview you. Your room always looks to me as though it's just been invaded by vandals. Now, how do you reconcile this with your extraordinarily polished, tidy, and beautifully cared for music making? I don't.
Maybe it's just the bad maid service at the hotel.
Oh, the shambles I've seen had nothing to do with the maids, I can assure you. You stay at always a very fashionable hotel, and then I think you systematically set about setting in the suite of rooms into disarray. Is that right?
Well, there are great decisions to be made before you leave for a recording session. I'll tell you one thing, which sounds really crazy, but it's quite true. I have found that there are certain... this sounds nuts, I shouldn't say it.
No.
I found that there are certain shirts
Off day today.
which facilitate playing the piano. And
Certain shirts?
Certain shirts. Because of the position of the cuffs and this sort of thing, I go through at least a dozen shirts before I set off for the studio every morning.
Oh, that accounts for it. I see these the trail of shirts. I thought there must be something Freudian behind it.
Well, it's not very, very Freudian, no.
No, but I understand. You see, Glenn, I'm being serious now, and I'm not joking.
Mm-hmm.
As I see you, they say genius is the capacity to take infinite pains, and as I see you, you're an extreme perfectionist in your work. I imagine you suffer more than anybody when you make the slightest slip, and therefore, attendant upon this attitude is these little eccentricities, right?
Well, I think so, Hugh.
I'm
that's a
serious
charitable
for
explanation, but I think it's also fairly accurate because I think playing the piano is a tremendous responsibility.
Well, certainly
doing anything in public is a tremendous responsibility, but it seems to me that part of the responsibility is the things that even if they aid only the mental capacity to carry on, these
That's
things
right.
are psychological aids, and as such they cannot be overvalued.
Well, I know in my nightly trips to concert halls and recital halls, I see a great deal of eccentricity without 1/10 of your talents. So I don't care so much about the eccentricity anymore.
Find a special reviewing shirt. That's my advice to you.
I suppose it would help. Everywhere you go, you have a special rug and a special chair, both of which look like something that fell off the back of a truck. Is there any purpose? And have you ever missed these on your itineraries? And
Well, they get lost occasionally.
What's happened when you haven't got your rug and chair now?
Fortunately, the chair has never been lost just before a concert. If it was, I don't know what I would do, and I'm quite serious, because that chair is so designed that it will go to about 13 inches off the floor. My normal seating position is between 13 and 14 inches off the floor, which is, as you know, extraordinarily low. And without that, I would simply have to commandeer the nearest chair and cut some of the legs off. There's nothing else I can do.
Have you had to do that?
Well, before I had this chair designed, I did that from hall to hall, and it was a very discomforting procedure because I usually had to pay for the chairs that I later.
I imagine you would. Who did the sawing?
Oh, my father finally decided.
Oh, you brought father along to the sawing.
Oh, yes.
I see. Well, the parents have their use.
Absolutely.
Now, let me ask this. I noticed, too, in my following you around the United States and Canada, that your preference seems to be for what's called a business suit, even in Carnegie Hall. You don't seem to like tails, right?
Right. However, I have been much more orthodox this past year. I've been wearing tails quite frequently. I always did wear them with orchestra engagements, with orchestra and concerto engagements, because it looked rather ludicrous if the sidemen were wearing them and the soloist wasn't. You know.
But
however, my preference in recital was always for this, because I felt that it made. For one thing, it makes getting dressed for the concert much easier, and for another thing, tails somehow always suggested to me, until very recently, putting a special effort forward, and I like to avoid anything that suggests this in relation to a concert, because it's very bad strategy to let yourself think that anything is a special event. You know, the easiest way to be happy at this business of making music is to treat every concert as if it were a day's work of any kind. You know. And the more things that you do to indicate that this is something special and apart from everyday pursuits, the more likely you are going to succumb to nervous tensions. Fortunately, I'm not a person who does succumb to nervous tensions very easily, and I think it's largely because of this, because I've sort of tried to, avoid circumstances of this kind. For instance, I give you a very good example. I have always, now it doesn't make so much difference, but I remember very well that when I made my New York debut, which was about 4 years ago,
I was there.
I especially requested my parents not to come. I even requested Homburger, my manager, not to come. He did, of course, disobeyed orders. But
I think I was requested.
I think I requested you not to come,
but
too,
I
didn't I? Yes, and for this very same reason, because I think that the more attention, the more special emphasis that is put on any one thing, the more concerned you become about it. You know. And it just seems to me bad strategy.
I see. Well, that's the Gould psychology,
That's
anyway.
the Gould psychology.
The second record of Glenn's to appear combined his talents with those of another controversial and colorful young man, Leonard Bernstein. Here is part of Beethoven's Second Piano Concerto, the cadenza of the first movement, with Gould at the piano and Bernstein on the podium before the Columbia Symphony.
In a minute, we get back to Glenn Gould and Hugh Thompson. This is Assignment.
And now, getting down to more human things, the curious critic Hugh Thompson asks Glenn,
Now, tell me, you're a fellow whom I've known for a long time, and you're certainly not one of these head-in-the-clouds types. Do you ever, when you're alone, maybe up in your retreat in northern Ontario, sat down and taken a popular tune like How High the Moon and done a little improvisation on it? Jazz style.
Yeah, I know what you mean. You know, Hugh, I'm really fascinated with Dixieland. And as a matter of fact, I used to have some recordings, not Dixieland particularly, but I used to have some Charlie Parker, Lenny Tristano recordings.
I didn't know. This is a new facet coming on.
Oh, yeah. But I was never any good at it. I was a complete flop as a jazz man. And it never fascinated me so much that I wanted to work at it either. There does, however, exist a Leonard Bernstein, Glenn Gould transcription of the slow movement of the D minor Bach concerto for piano, double bass, and anybody else who cared to join in. We did this after we finished recording it last year with the Columbia Orchestra.
I understand that you're now have three facets to your activities. You're naturally a concert pianist of great distinction. You're a composer of limited acceptance.
I beg your pardon.
Well, I don't know that I've never... your works aren't done in a national,
no,
international
that's
scale.
True. Right.
And you're also a budding conductor. Now, fill me in on this conductor, will you?
Well,
I've never seen you conduct, but I imagine it'd be quite a spectacle, old boy.
Well, you know, I made my debut as a conductor last September out in Vancouver with the CBC Orchestra up there.
Oh, I didn't
and
know
at the
that.
present time,
Where
that
was
is my
I at the
debut
time?
and my farewell appearance. Because shortly after that, I found that when I was conducting in a rehearsal sense now, I was practically crippled for playing the piano. This sounds exaggerated, but actually it was exactly what happened. I found that one uses an entirely different set of muscular coordination in conducting, you know, and it's something I learned as a rather hard experience because I had to cancel a couple of concerts as a pianist when I found this out too late. So what really broke my heart was that I had a wonderful engagement to guest conduct the St. Louis Symphony next season, and I had to cancel it because it came right in the middle of a tour, you know, with concerts on either side by a few days, and I was afraid that if this sort of thing repeats itself very often, it would, you know, seriously interfere with my playing the piano. However, I do not intend to forego conducting indefinitely. I think one of these times I'm going to retire as a pianist, and then I shall be a conductor for the rest of my life.
A conductor for the rest of your life?
Oh, sure. Conductors live a long time, you know. It'll give me several more years to look forward to.
Would you like to be conductor of the Toronto Symphony Orchestra someday?
I think all the men know me for too long. I don't think that would work, you know. They've known me since I was a kid. I'm generally regarded as a brat in those circles, so I better pick another orchestra a little farther away from home.
Now, Glenn, you've made a number of recordings, and as I say, I've been down for some of the sessions. The last time you appeared in Massey Hall here, you played a Haydn and Mozart sonata.
Yes.
And it seems to me that when I went to Carnegie Hall later, you played the same works.
Two works. Just the
Mozart.
Mozart. The Haydn,
Oh.
I didn't do that.
At any rate, I was in New York when you recorded these.
That's right.
Have these been published yet?
No.
Oh, I see.
And, as a matter of fact, we did a couple more concertos, which are... May I plug them?
Well,
With Vladimir Goffman conducting.
Knowing you and your great concern for the conditions under which you work, such as the temperature and so on of the room and your mitts, that you have you any little anecdote you could tell us, amusing or otherwise, in connection with recording sessions?
Oh, that's putting me on the spot. We should have rehearsed this before. Well, I'll tell you one thing, which has never been published, and all copyrights reserved on it. This is a special to assignment, but it was actually something which was very funny and which at the time, for various reasons, we didn't let out, but I don't really mind now. When I was recording the Goldberg Variations, the first record I made for Columbia, they first had occasion to notice the fact that I sing a little bit when I play, a very little bit, naturally. You know that, don't you?
Yes.
Thank you. Anyway, they had occasion to notice that, and so somebody mentioned that it would be a very good thing when I next came to make a recording if I'd play with a gas mask on. And so we had another session a couple of months later, and I was recording some Beethoven sonatas, And I went to a war surplus store a couple of months before, and I bought a gas mask, and I practiced on this thing, and I actually got that I could play with it on, you know. It was a marvelous thing, and as it happened, they had arranged for a photographer who was doing a story at the time for Life magazine to drop in this day, you see.
Gould and gas mask.
I sort of stepped out of the room. I didn't know there was anybody special going to be there, of course, and I stepped out of the room, put this gas mask on, came back in, and, of course, the studio were all convulsed. However, this fellow immediately started shooting pictures, you know.
Oh, I see.
And at the time, there had been so much nonsense about the various things I do that we decided that the great American public would really take this thing seriously. And we had one heck of a time to get those pictures suppressed. It was dreadful.
I just want to say how grateful we are to have you on assignment. I've always been a fan of yours, as you know, and I wish you the very best luck in your European tour this summer.
Thank you, Hugh. It's been a great pleasure.
We've been listening to a recorded interview between the Canadian piano virtuoso Glenn Gould and Toronto Daily Star music critic Hugh Thompson. Mr. Gould has recently been twice honored.
He's been invited to play with the Boyd Neal Orchestra at the Brussels World Fair.
And he's been invited to take part in the 10th anniversary celebrations in Israel. Best of luck, Glenn Gould, and Godspeed.